College football playoff quarterfinal at the All-State Sugar Bowl pits the number 2 seeded Georgia Bulldogs against the 7th seeded Irish of Notre Dame. This game will be January 1st, 8:45 Eastern time on ESPN. Right now, Georgia is about a 2-point favorite thereabouts. The total hovers around 43.5. I'm looking forward to being on the call alongside Sean McDonough, Molly McGrath, and Laura Rutledge there in New Orleans. It's going to be amazing. This is the 4th meeting between Georgia and Notre Dame. The Bulldogs are 3-0. All 3 of those wins for Georgia came within the 7-point margin of victory. So these games seemingly have always come down to the wire, and we've seen some classics really not that far removed from a couple classics in the home and home that we saw 6-7 years ago. Notre Dame and Georgia have one common opponent this season. That would be Georgia Tech. Who would have thought, by the way, that we'd be talking about these quarterfinal games on our quarterfinal preview show, and Georgia Tech has a spot here. Fighting Irish handled their business 31-13. That was when Zach Pyron started for Georgia Tech, so you didn't get to see them against Haynes King. But Haynes King was back in action when it went down to an 8-overtime classic between Georgia Tech and Georgia in the final game of the regular season. Georgia, of course, prevailed in that game 44-42. That was really incredible considering the Dogs at one point were down by 17 points. Now, dating back to last year, though, Notre Dame in games like this, they've been great. They have won 7 consecutive games against ranked opponents. But one problem for Notre Dame is that since the BCS was implemented in 1998, Notre Dame is 0-8 in BCS and or New Year's Six bowl games. That's the most losses without a win by any team, including conference championships. So pretty significant that things are working against the Irish historically, but in recent years, they've been great playing against top-tier competition. Let's start with question 1. Is Gunner Stockton ready for prime time? Now, Gunner Stockton will be filling in for the injured Carson Beck. Now, Carson Beck on the final play of what might be his college career, dropping back, drifting left, hit on his arm, hurt his elbow, hated seeing it go down like that. He had a tremendous career. This season was a little bit up and down, but you hate to see him get injured. But what you like to see after the fact is that what was done was done. Carson Beck was out. Everyone on Georgia's team seemingly rallied around Gunner Stockton. It was really impressive to watch. And they need to now continue that momentum into their prep and then ultimately into the Sugar Bowl game. Gunner Stockton would be the first quarterback to make his first college start in a playoff game since the format started back in 2014. Now, the fewest starts ever by a quarterback in a college football playoff game was 2. That was Cardale Jones. He made his first start in the Big Ten championship game, and then his second start was against that Alabama team in 2014. That was the Sugar Bowl, ironically enough, and Ohio State went on to win that game and then ultimately beat Oregon for the national championship. But little background on who Gunner Stockton is. I didn't know a whole lot about him. I don't follow recruiting the way a lot of places do, but top 5 dual threat quarterback recruit. He did break Trevor Lawrence's high school record for passing touchdowns in the state of Georgia. That's pretty impressive. And so far, albeit limited work, he's played in 8 games in his career. He's put together 18 rushes for 108 yards. That's excluding sacks. So it does appear like Georgia's offense is probably going to change quite a bit with Gunner Stockton in at the quarterback spot. When he was there in the SEC championship game, they called 6 designed quarterback runs. 5 were done by Gunner Stockton. So think that now in a game in which he's going to play a full half, probably expecting at least 10, 12, 15, maybe 20 designed quarterback runs. That seems aggressive, but probably double digits, more than likely. Now, this is the first time that we saw Georgia utilize quarterback run all season. Now, Carson Beck would take off, but it was mostly in scramble situations. They never, not one time, all season long, called more than 2 designed quarterback runs prior to the SEC championship game. So that is one element too, by the way, that I think benefits Georgia here, is that Notre Dame is going to be preparing for Georgia's offense with their practice regimen. But what is Georgia's offense going to look like? It's a legitimate question. So there is a possibility that Notre Dame in their prep, maybe they're chasing a few ghosts. Because, well, I think they are going to run quarterback power. Oh, I think they'll have quarterback sweep. Oh, I think they're going to run quarterback draw on 2nd and 6. Those are all thinks. Those are not knows. If Carson Beck was the starting quarterback in this game for Georgia, then Notre Dame would know exactly what the offense would look like with him at the helm, considering they have 13 games of tape to study and develop the tendency call sheet for. Question number 2, can Notre Dame run the football? Stats speak for themselves. Top 11 in the country in yards per game with 222. Number 3 in the country in yards per carry at over 6 yards per carry. And they're 3rd in the country in rushing touchdowns with 42. Now, Jeremiah Love is incredible. He's an amazing, amazing back. I said it when we called their game against Indiana. His skill set, if you've never watched him, reminds me an awful lot of Darren McFadden. He's kind of a tall runner. He's got long stride. He runs a little upright. But my goodness, when he gets to the edge, he's out the gate. And he showed that in that 98-yard touchdown run against Indiana. That was the longest play from scrimmage in the college football playoff history. And it's tied for the longest rush in Notre Dame history. Josh Adams had that record back in 2015 against Wake Forest. The problem is, if you look back at that game, the 98 yards was amazing, but they averaged just 2.8 yards per carry on their other 34 carries. 95 yards on 34 carries equates to 2.8. So it wasn't an elite day as far as running the football if you remove the 98-yard touchdown run, but still, how do you remove it? That's what he does. If he gets to the edge and takes it to the house, it is what it is. The guy's amazing. The most impressive thing about this rushing attack, though, is how good they are after contact. Because you can be in the right spot, but it doesn't matter. This team collectively averages nearly 4 yards after contact per carry. That's the second best in college football behind Boise State. Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love both rank in the top 3 in yards after contact per carry. Jadarian Price is 1, Jeremiah Love is 3. I'll give you just a half second to guess who you think is right between those two, sandwiched by Price and Love. That would be correct if you said Ashton Genty. Makes sense, right? These two guys really good after contact, just like Genty is. But I don't know if many people would know that Price actually leads the country in yards after contact per carry. He actually has over 5 yards per carry after contact. It's pretty amazing. They might have most of their success against Georgia outside the tackles, because this is a Georgia team, especially between the tackles, man. They are big, they are physical, and they really do a great job of just anchoring down in the middle of this defensive line. So if you look at the game against Alabama, you look at the way some other teams have run it against the Dogs this year, a lot of it's probably going to come to the perimeter. Probably a lot of it's going to come outside the tackles. The good news for Notre Dame is that Jeremiah Love, when he gets outside the tackles, which is not often, I might add, he doesn't have some ridiculous amount of carries outside the tackles. That's why this number is probably slightly inflated. He averages 14 yards per carry outside the tackles. So think about that for a moment. Probably should implement a few more perimeter runs for Jeremiah Love, given how efficient he's been on runs like that this year. Now, Georgia's rush defense, it's taken a bit of a step back, if we're going to be honest. Now, between the tackles, like I said, very, very good. But from 2019 to 2022, a couple national championships in there as well, they allowed just 76 rushing yards per game over a 4-year period. Now, in 2023, they were pretty good. They were top 20. But now it's jumped to in the vicinity of like 120, 125 yards a game. It's top 20, like I said, but it's not 76 yards a game. That's where they were for a 4-season span. So it's a group that you can get it against them, but it's likely on the edges and it's likely on the perimeter. Question number 3, will Georgia's front 7 overwhelm Notre Dame's offensive line? Now, against the best team that Georgia's faced this year, the front 7's athleticism completely took over the game. That was the Texas Longhorns, and the front 7 for Georgia just completely took over the game with movement and shifts and agility and guys just hitting the offensive line at 1,000,000 miles an hour and just blowing things up. Now, they were able to shut down Texas's run game because the pass rush stopped the run en route to the passer. So as a result, those 2 games against Texas, they went for a combined 60 rushing yards. It's the only times the Longhorns were held under 100 rushing yards this year. Now, when you look at when Georgia struggled, against, say, Bama and Ole Miss, they struggled to rush the passer in those two games. 1/3 of Georgia's sacks this season came in the two games against Texas. They have 36 on the year. Against Texas, they had 13. And Mykel Williams and Jalen Walker combined for 8 of those 13. And Jalen Walker is now the proud recipient of the 2024 Butkus Award as the nation's top linebacker. So I think the front seven here for Georgia is going to have to be at their very best in creating disruption and limiting what is a three-headed rushing attack with Love and Price, and not to mention Riley Leonard, who is also excellent with the ball in his hands. We've already seen Haynes King get loose with a lot of quarterback runs. We've seen Haynes King really hurt Georgia with design quarterback run game. You would anticipate a heavy load from Riley Leonard in the run game as well. Question number 4, can Riley Leonard continue to stay efficient in the passing attack? Now, if you want to rewind back to the Navy game, that was on October 26th. Riley Leonard's really been great throwing the football since that time. He's got 11 touchdowns throwing it, just 3 picks. If you look at the 7 games prior to that Navy game, it wasn't nearly as good. He had 6 touchdowns in those first 7 games. Well, in the last handful, he's got 11 with just 3 picks. So he's been really, really good. He's thrown a touchdown in all 6 games during this stretch. He's completing 75% of his passes over the last 3 weeks. And while it hasn't been as much about the downfield throws, most of what he does is at or around the line of scrimmage. He averages about 7.2 yards downfield per attempt. That's 110th out of 127. And against Indiana, the most recent game, he had just 1 throw that traveled more than 10 yards downfield. And that was a big post to Jordan Faison as Riley Leonard was stepping up in the pocket. That was the one time they tried it downfield. Now, they called more plays to go downfield. They called a few shots in the game, but he was very comfortable taking the check down because that's what the team needed to be successful. He's been really efficient. He's made great decisions. Another thing he's done too is he started to really attack the blitz, which I really appreciate. Against Indiana's pass rush, when Indiana brought some heat, Riley Leonard seemingly always had an answer. So far this year against the blitz, Riley Leonard is 11-1 touchdown interception ratio. Well, Georgia, they're going to heat you up. They're not afraid to call pressure. They're not afraid to bring guys from the second level. They've called blitzes on 35% of the opponent's dropbacks that they faced this year. That's top 15 or 16 in the country. When they do bring a lot of pressure, though, they're getting home about 50% of the time. I mean, that's pretty impressive. So when they blitz, they're getting guys home and forcing the quarterback to make quick decisions. And they're probably going to be pretty aggressive in this game. Because if you look at how Georgia's played, they've allowed at least 9 explosive plays, 10-yard run, 20-yard passes in 3 of their last 5 games. So I would think that they're probably going to be a little bit more aggressive because this has not been a Notre Dame team that's willing to take a lot of shots downfield. So I think Georgia will kind of squat on things underneath. I think they'll blitz. I think they'll try to force it out of Riley Leonard's hands quickly, and they'll force him to make great decisions with extra guys in his face. Question number 5, can Georgia find some balance offensively? And this might help with moving to Gunner Stockton, a guy that as a quarterback is a little more capable with his legs. Because right now, Georgia's running the ball in 39% of their offensive snaps. That's 116th in the FBS. Now, this is a huge deviation from what Kirby Smart has traditionally been. He got the job in 2016, and in the first 7 or 8 years of his tenure from 2016 to 2023, they were running it on about 53% of their offensive snaps. Well, to go from 53% in the first 8 years to now 39%, that's a pretty significant drop. And if you look at the passing game, it's not like it's the most efficient, and it's not like it's, the air raid. All right. Most of their stuff's really high percentage, kind of extended handoffs type of plays, but a lot of it is based on getting the ball out really quickly. I mean, nearly 1/3 of their passing attempts come at or behind the line of scrimmage. That's among the highest in the FBS. And drops have been a problem too. They lead the FBS in drops. So they have to stay efficient throwing the football, but they might want to open things up off play action a little bit more if they can get the run game going. And then question number 6, can Notre Dame apply some pressure defensively? Big note in this game are the injuries for Notre Dame. Boubacar Traore, They lost him earlier in the year. They lost Botello early in the year, another edge rusher. And now they've lost Riley Mills, who got hurt, unfortunately, the defensive tackle against Indiana after leg whipping his own guy. So they're going to have to create some pressure. Howard Cross is back. He's a defensive tackle that's really disruptive along the front. And Notre Dame, they don't blitz some crazy amount. They're about 30% of the time. That's top 40 in the country. But last year, I mean, they were a team that blitzed nearly half the time. So they were at 46, 47% last year in blitz. This year, that number's dropped off considerably, but you haven't seen the pressure rate totally drop off, but it might need to step up here in this game with some simulated pressures, bringing guys and then dropping defensive ends out, because I'm not sure outside of Howard Cross who the guy is going to be that's going to be able to create his own shot. It might be Bryce Love. It might be him, but at this point, or Bryce Young, excuse me, not Bryce Love, the former Stanford running back, Bryce Young, the 6'7" true freshman that is wreaking havoc on opposing tackles as a young 18-year-old. So Bryce Young might be the guy, but it's to be determined who's going to step up in Riley Mills' absence, because that is a significant one. This has been a defense that has had some issues from an injury standpoint this year. Just hope it doesn't catch up with them here as they move forward in the postseason. The reason why pressure is so significant, this is a Gunner Stockton. His first career start, he was blitzed on just 4 dropbacks in the SEC championship game. All right, he was sacked once. He had 1 completion in those 4 dropbacks, and it went for -2 yards. He also threw an interception. So he has not handled pressure well, albeit super small sample size of just 4 dropbacks against blitz. But I would think that number is probably going to go up a little bit when you face the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Really low total in the game. Couple trends. 43.5 is a really low total. You have to wonder how much of that has to do with the respect that most people have for the defenses on both sides, and how much of that has to do with the backup quarterback stepping in for an injured Carson Beck. Huge question in the game. But, man, it's going to be awesome. I will not make a pick in this game, but I will be on the call alongside Sean McDonough, Molly McGrath, and Laura Rutledge from New Orleans at 8:45 Eastern on January 1st.